Ghosts from the past. A former police officer is haunted by an unsolved murder case from 15 years ago, in which his best friend was the victim. After retiring, he decides to reopen the file himself, re-interviewing old witnesses and searching for overlooked clues. His investigation leads him deep into the buried secrets of the victim's family, lies that have been sustained for decades, and a heartbreaking truth about human nature. Subscribe to the channel to follow the stories you never imagined could happen in our own lives. Here is the full story.
The light that evening had the color of old whiskey soft, burnt gold slipping through the blinds of a forgotten office. Dust floated in the air like tired ghosts, and in the middle of it all sat Kalen, the man who used to chase the truth for a living, until the truth chased him back. The office was small, lined with file boxes that leaned like crooked tombstones. Cigarette smoke lingered where the habit had long died. The desk bore the scars of decades' coffee rings, knife marks, and a single photograph turned face down, as if it too couldn't bear to look at him anymore. He poured himself a drink, not because he needed it, but because that's what you did when memories refused to stay buried. The amber liquid caught the last ray of sunlight and set the room on fire just for a second. That's when he noticed it. The photograph. It had slipped from a folder and landed near his shoe, an old black and white shot, curled at the edges. Two men in their prime, standing shoulder to shoulder, laughing like the world hadn't yet gone dark. One of them was Kalen, the other, the dead man. He hadn't said his name in years. Saying it now felt like swallowing glass. Kalen picked up the photo. His hand trembled not from age, but from the kind of guilt that never really stops shaking you. The friend in the picture, the one who'd been found sprawled in a pool of blood 15 years ago, still stared at him with the same open grin, as if time hadn't won. A whisper escaped him. "God damn you, Jonah. You still haunt me." He slumped back in his chair, the leather groaning beneath his weight. Outside, the city hummed its endless dirge sirens, distant horns, life moving on without permission. But inside, Kalen's clock had stopped the night Jonah died. The case had gone cold. Too many lies, too much noise, and one detective who couldn't bear to look deeper. They'd called it an accident. He'd called it the day the light went out. He reached for the file cabinet bottom drawer. Far left, the one that hadn't been opened since the funeral, the label, written in fading ink, case number 47J Unresolved. He hesitated, thumb brushing the edge of the folder. A small, sharp pain flared in his chest, not from his heart, but from the memory that lived there. Then, with a sigh that sounded like surrender, he pulled it open. The smell of old paper filled the room dry, brittle, and honest. He laid out the contents like a priest performing a ritual. Crime scene photos, autopsy reports, statements from people who'd lied to save their own skin. And in the middle of it, a single note, written in Jonah's handwriting. "If anything happens to me, look at Zayden." Kalen frowned. He remembered the name, a ghostly echo from a lifetime ago. A businessman, slick smile, no conscience, but the case never connected him. Not officially, not enough evidence. Still, Jonah had written it for a reason. Kalen leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. His eyes traced the ceiling cracks, as if they might spell out the answers he'd ignored. His reflections stared back from the window-lined face. Weary eyes. A man caught between penance and obsession. He poured another drink. This time, it wasn't for the memory. It was for resolve. The sun had long set. The city lights bled into his office, painting long, lonely streaks of gold across the files. A train rumbled in the distance, a low growl that carried the weight of everything left unsaid. Kalen took the photo one last time, studied Jonah's smile, and muttered, "You deserve better, old friend. Maybe it's time I earned my peace." He reached across the desk, grabbed a pen, and scrawled 3 words on a blank notepad: "Reopen case 47J." The pen hovered there for a second, then pressed down hard as if the ink itself was an oath. He picked up the phone. The line crackled the old kind, where voices came through like whispers from the grave. "Seraph," he said, his voice a mix of gravel and regret. "It's Kaylin. We need to talk. About Jonah." Silence. Then, a breath on the other end. "I was wondering when you'd call." Click. The line went dead. Kaylin looked around the room. The shadows seemed closer now, as if the ghosts had been waiting for this moment all along. He smiled a thin, bitter curve that didn't quite reach his eyes. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain, somewhere in the distance. Thunder rolled slow and deliberate. The city was about to sleep, but Kaylin was just waking up. He closed the folder, tucked the photo inside, and stood. The floorboards groaned beneath his steps as he crossed to the window. The night beyond was thick with fog, the kind that hides more than it reveals. He lit a cigarette, exhaled smoke into the dark, and whispered to no one in particular. "All right, Jonah, let's finish what we started." And just like that, the past was alive again. The road to Seraph's house wound through the edges of the city like an old, scar-cracked pavement, too quiet for comfort. Kaylin drove slow, one hand on the wheel, the other nursing a cigarette that had long burned past its taste. The radio hissed faintly, stuck between stations. Somewhere. A preacher's voice battled static talking about forgiveness. Kaylin turned it off. Seraph lived in a weathered townhouse near the river, where fog clung to the windows like ghosts that never got the message. He hadn't seen her in over a decade, not since the funeral. She'd looked older then. Now she looked empty. When she opened the door, the years fell between them like dust. "Kaylin." She said his name, half sigh, half disbelief. "Seraph." He tipped his hat, out of habit more than respect. Inside smelled of lavender and old paper. Photographs lined the walls, her son's face in every stage of youth. Frozen right before the world turned cruel. She moved slow, careful, like the house itself might crumble if she spoke too loudly. They sat in the living room, a cup of tea untouched between them. The clock ticked somewhere in the hall, its rhythm like a heartbeat that had forgotten who it belonged to. "You shouldn't have come," she said finally. "I could say the same thing about him," Kaylin replied. Her eyes flicked up sharp for a moment, then softened. "You still think someone else killed him?" "I think we stopped asking the right questions." Kaylin said, 15 years is a long time for the truth to rot." Seraph looked toward the window. "There was an argument. The night before he died. I told the police, but they didn't listen." "With who?" Kaylin asked. She hesitated. "His wife, Alara. It wasn't the first time. They were unraveling." The word hung there, brittle and trembling. Kaylin nodded slowly, watching her hands shake around the teacup. "You remember anything else?" She looked up at him the way a drowning person looks at the surface, only that he called me that night. He sounded afraid. "Kaylin, my boy was never afraid." The detective sat in silence, the words sinking deep. Then he stood, adjusted his coat, and said softly, "Fear has a way of showing up right before the truth does." As he stepped out into the gray daylight, Seraph's voice followed him. "If you find out what really happened, don't tell me. Some mothers don't need the truth, just peace." Kaylin didn't answer. He didn't believe in peace anymore. The cafe was one of those places that pretended to be cheerful sunlight through glass, polished counters, music too soft to matter. Alara sat near the window, sunglasses on, though there was no real sun. When she saw Kaylin, her lips formed a half-smile, polite, not warm. "Detective," she said, crossing her legs. "Or do I call you Mr. Kaylin now?" "Kaylin's fine," he said, taking the seat across from her. "You look good. Time's been kinder to you than most." She let out a dry laugh. "Time doesn't care. Darling, it just forgets slower with some people." A waiter brought coffee. Kaylin didn't touch his. He watched her instead, the way her fingers tapped the cup. Controlled, mechanical. the way her eyes kept drifting to the window, measuring the exits. I talked to Seraph. Kaylin said. Ilara's expression didn't move, still alive. Then she mentioned an argument. The night before. That was 15 years ago, she said, smiling too easily. You'd be surprised how much you forget in 15 years. I don't forget, Kaylin said quietly. Something flickered in her face, a crack. Gone as quickly as it came. She leaned in. Whatever you're doing, stop. The case is closed for a reason. He leaned back, voice low and even. Closed doesn't mean finished. For a second, her composure wavered, then she slid a few bills under the cup and stood. You always loved your ghosts. Kaylin, just remember they don't love you back. She walked out, perfume trailing behind her like smoke. Kaylin watched her go, a strange ache settling in his chest. There was guilt there, hers, his, maybe everyone's. He pulled out a notebook, scribbled 3 words, Ilara knows something. Then he tore the page out and pocketed it. That evening, Kaylin sat in his old office, lights dim, the hum of the city leaking through the cracked window. The place smelled like rain and memory. Files were scattered across the desk, names, dates, the same case he'd sworn to bury years ago. He picked up the phone, dialed a number from memory. A younger voice answered. Myron here. Myron, Kaylin said. It's Kaylin. A pause. Then Detective Kaylin. It's been, what, 10 years? Closer to 15. Kaylin said. You busy always, Myron replied.
But I owe you a drink, or a few answers. Which do you want first, answers?
Kaylin said. They agreed to meet the next day. When Kaylin hung up, he sat there in the silence, the city humming below like a machine too boomed to stop. He poured himself a drink bourbon, no ice, and raised it to the photograph on the wall. His old partner, gone, the face that started it all. Looks like we're not done yet, he muttered. Outside. Thunder rolled low and distant, not a storm yet, but close, and somewhere in the dark veins of the city, the truth began to stir again. Because ghosts never rest, not the kind made of flesh, guilt, and half-told lies. Rain came back to the city like a bad habit, slow at first, then steady, whispering against glass and concrete. Kaylin sat in his car, watching the drops race each other down the windshield. The air smelled like rust and wet pavement. He took a drag from his cigarette, the ember glowing in the dark, a small rebellion against the damp. The office building loomed across the street, long abandoned, its windows blind with grime. It used to belong to him, the victim, Kaylin's old partner, the place where everything had started and, maybe, where it had ended. He crossed the street, his coat pulled tight, the world around him muffled by rain. The front door groaned as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and memory. Dust covered the floor like snow, untouched for years. Kaylin's flashlight swept over desks, file cabinets, the ghost of a life left behind. Then a glint, metal, a small lockbox half buried under papers. He crouched, pried it open. Inside a notebook, the leather cracked with age. His partner's handwriting jagged, rushed. He flipped through it, each page a piece of a puzzle he didn't know he was still solving. Debts, names, transactions, and then one name circled 3 times, Zayden Cole. Kaylin felt something cold crawl up his spine. Zayden, the golden boy of the old business world. Smiled like a shark, dressed like he'd never been caught in the rain. Kaylin slipped the notebook into his coat, locked the door behind him, and stepped back into the storm. The bar was one of those places where time stopped keeping score, neon lights flickering, the jukebox playing songs no one remembered. Zayden sat in a corner booth, a glass of whiskey untouched, his reflection split in the mirror behind him. Kaylin slid into the seat across from him. Didn't think you'd still haunt joints like this, Zayden said, smirking. His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind that made lies sound like truth. I'm a creature of habit, Kalen said, "and I've got a few questions." Zayden raised a brow. "Questions? After all these years, I thought you'd learn to bury the past." Kalen leaned forward. "Some things don't stay buried." He pulled out the notebook, let it drop on the table with a soft thud. The sound was louder than thunder in the silence that followed. Zayden's smirk twitched. "Where'd you get that from your friend?" Kalen said. "The one who ended up dead." Zayden's eyes hardened. "You don't want to open that door again." "Detective, I already did," Kalen said. "Now I want to know what's on the other side." Zayden chuckled low, humorless. Still the same old Kalen. You think you can solve everything with questions, but sometimes the answers just burn. He took a sip of his drink, then set it down carefully. "Walk away, Kalen, before you drown in ghosts that aren't even yours." Kalen watched him for a long moment, then stood. "You're right," he said, tossing a few bills on the table. "But I've always been a lousy swimmer." He turned to leave, but Zayden's voice followed him. "You think you're chasing truth? You're not. You're just chasing the pieces of yourself you lost when he died." Kalen didn't look back. "Maybe," he said, "but sometimes that's the only way to feel alive." Later that night, Kalen sat in his apartment, the notebook open under a single lamp. Rain beat against the window, steady and patient. He traced the names written inside people he hadn't seen in years, deals that never made sense. Then, a new name. Rice and Kell, next to it warehouse, Pier 9, night of the murder. Kalen's breath caught. Rye and the mechanic, the man who claimed he'd seen nothing that night. He grabbed his coat, the old revolver in the drawer, and left. The warehouse at Pier 9 was asleep under the fog. Kalen's footsteps echoed, soft but certain, inside. He found Rysand hunched over a workbench, oil-stained hands busy with a carburetor. When the door creaked, Reeson froze. "Jesus, you scared the hell out of me." Kalen stepped closer. "You still fixing engines, Reese?" The man turned, blinking. "Kalen, damn, I thought you were retired." "Yeah, I was. But I found something that says you were there the night he died." Rysand's face paled. "I told the cops everything I knew." Kalen's voice was calm. "You told them what Zayden paid you to say." Reeson looked down, the silence heavy. His hands trembled slightly. "I didn't want trouble," he said. "Zayden showed up after it happened. Said if I kept quiet, I'd be taken care of. I needed the money." Kalen took a slow step forward. "What did you see?" Rysand swallowed hard. "I saw your partner arguing with someone. A man, tall, expensive suit. I didn't see the face, just heard shouting. Then a crash. When I came closer, he was already on the floor. Dead." Rysand nodded. "Zayden told me to forget it. Said it was better that way." Kalen stared at him, the air thick with oil and guilt. Better for who? Rysand didn't answer. Kalen left him there, under the humming lights of that dying warehouse. Outside, the fog pressed close, the city whispering secrets only the damned could hear. Back in his car, Kalen lit another cigarette and looked at the notebook again. Zayden, Elara, Rysand, every name a knot, and he was the fool trying to untangle them. The truth was moving slow, but alive, and Kalen could feel it breathing again, in the rearview mirror. Thunder flashed, and for a moment, he swore he saw his old partner's reflection staring back at him. Then it was gone. Just rain, and the sound of the past knocking one more time. Rain was coming down hard that night, the kind that turns the city into a watercolor painting. All edges blurred and colors bleeding together. Kalen stood outside Elara's house, the porch light flickering like it was trying to make up its mind. He could have left, should have, but that's the thing about the truth once you've smelled it. It clings to you like smoke. He knocked once, twice. The door opened slow. Elara stood there in a silk robe, her hair damp, Her eyes tired. She looked smaller than before, like the years had finally caught up and demanded their debt. "Kaylin," she said softly, "you look like hell." "Been walking through it," he said. "Mind if I come in?" She hesitated, just a flicker, then stepped aside. The house smelled of rain and old perfume. Classical music drifted from somewhere upstairs, faint and melancholy. He noticed a half-packed suitcase near the stairs. "Going somewhere?" Kaylin asked. "Just getting away for a while," she said. "Running." "You mean—" She froze, then turned, eyes sharp. "You think I killed him, don't you?" Kaylin didn't answer. He reached into his coat, pulled out the notebook, her husband's. He set it down on the table between them, next to a half-empty glass of wine. "I think you know what really happened," he said. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. For a long moment, she didn't speak. The thunder outside filled the silence. Then she whispered, "You shouldn't have come back." "Probably not," Kaylin said, "but I did, and I've got a feeling you've been waiting for someone to knock on that door ever since." She looked at him, really looked, and something broke behind her eyes. Elara sank into a chair. Her voice came out small, fragile. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Kaylin sat across from her. "Tell me." She took a shaky breath. "It was Myron, our son. He found out his father was having an affair. He was furious, said he was going to confront him that night. I begged him not to, but—" Her voice cracked. "He went anyway." Kaylin's jaw tightened. "He was there." Elara nodded, tears tracing down her face. They fought." Myron pushed him. "It was an accident." He hit his head. The table, there was blood, so much blood. She buried her face in her hands. "I panicked. Called Zayden. He came. Said he'd handle it. Said the truth would destroy Myron's life." And Risa, Kaylin asked quietly, "Zayden paid him to keep his mouth shut." She said, "He made it all look like a robbery gone wrong. I let him." Kaylin sat back, staring at the floor. The air between them was heavy, choking. "So that's it," he said finally. 15 years chasing shadows. And the truth was a scared kid and a mother trying to protect him. She looked up, eyes red, voice trembling. "You think that makes me innocent?" "No," Kaylin said. "But it makes you human. Outside." Lightning split the sky, bright and brutal. For a moment, her face was a painting of guilt and grief, caught in white fire. Elara wiped her eyes. "I've lived with it every day. Myron doesn't remember that night or pretends not to. I thought if I stayed silent, maybe time would make it fade." Kaylin shook his head. "Time doesn't erase anything. It just buries it under more dirt." She gave a bitter laugh. "You came here for the truth. Now you have it." "What are you going to do?" Kaylin stood slowly. "That's the problem with truth," he said. "Once you find it, it stops being yours." He turned toward the door. Behind him, Elara's voice broke again. "Will you tell him?" Kaylin stopped. "He deserves to know. But maybe not tonight." He stepped out into the rain. The door closed softly behind him. The night swallowed him whole. He walked without thinking, the city stretching out in endless shades of gray. The rain washed over him, but it couldn't rinse away the weight in his chest. He'd wanted the truth, begged for it, and now that he had it, it felt like a curse. At the corner diner, neon buzzed weakly against the dark. Kaylin ducked inside, ordered black coffee, and sat by the window. His reflection stared back at him, older, emptier. The radio played some old blues number, soft and slow. He thought of Myron, the kid who'd grown up with the kind of silence that kills from the inside. Thought of Elara, sitting alone in that house, drowning in memories. Maybe Seraph was right. Some people don't need the truth. They just need peace. Kaylin sipped his coffee, the bitterness anchoring him to the moment. Outside, the rain slowed, turning to mist. He pulled the notebook from his coat, flipped to the last page. There, in his partner's handwriting. A single line: "If you're reading this, it means I never made it home." Kalen closed it gently. Neither did I. Partner, he murmured, not really. He left a few crumpled bills on the counter and walked back into the fog. The city was still breathing, still alive but quieter now. And somewhere in that silence, Kalen made himself a promise. He would find Myron. He would finish what he started, because the dead weren't done talking. And neither was he. The city was half asleep when Kalen arrived at Myron Vale's office, a glass tower scraping at the fog, lit by the lonely pulse of fluorescent light. Inside, the world smelled of money and burnt coffee, the kind of place where secrets were stored in polished drawers and locked hearts. Myron was there, waiting. No security, no pretense, just him, sleeves rolled up, tie undone, staring out at the rain streaking down the windows. When he turned, Kalen saw the ghost of the boy he'd met all those years ago, eager eyes now dulled, charm worn thin. "Detective Kalen," he said quietly, "you've been busy." Kalen stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Long night. Thought I'd drop by." Myron offered a tired smile. "Coffee, or something stronger?" "Truth," Kalen said. "Neat." Myron sighed, walked over to the bar, and poured 2 glasses of whiskey anyway. Truth doesn't taste good without a chaser. He handed one over. Kalen didn't drink. "You know why I'm here," Kalen said. "Yeah," Myron said. "I was hoping it would take you a little longer." Kalen set the notebook on the table between them, the same one Alara had wept over hours ago. The pages were wrinkled, water-stained, like it had survived a flood of memories. "Your mother told me everything," Kalen said. Myron's hand froze on the glass. For a second, the only sound was the low hum of the city outside. Then he whispered, "I was afraid of that." Kalen studied him. No anger, no denial, just the look of a man staring at the edge of his own reflection. "She said it was an accident." Kalen said, "That you didn't mean to." Myron nodded slowly, staring into his drink. "I didn't. But that doesn't change what I did." He sat down, his voice steady but hollow. "I went there that night to confront him. I'd found out about the affair, the lies. I thought I was protecting my mother. Turns out I was just trying to punish him for loving someone else." He took a shaky breath. "We argued. He said things, cruel things. I pushed him. He fell. The sound." He stopped, swallowing hard. "It still wakes me up sometimes." Kalen watched him in silence, the weight of the confession sinking into the room like smoke. Myron looked up. "She tried to clean it up. My mother. She called Zayden. I didn't even know until the next morning that they'd staged everything. Said it was for my own good." He laughed, bitter and broken. "Funny thing about good intentions, they rot just like everything else." Kalen's voice was low, gravel soft. "You've been living with this for 15 years. "Living," Myron said, shaking his head. "No, I've been existing. Every deal I close, every handshake, every smile, it's all been to drown that night. But it doesn't drown. Detective. It just learns to float." Kalen leaned forward. "So what now?" Myron looked out the window. The city was waking, lights flickering on, traffic crawling through mist. "I don't know," he said. "I've spent half my life trying to be better than that night, but it's still there. Waiting." He turned back to Kalen. "You going to turn me in?" Kalen stared at the glass of whiskey between them, the reflection of 2 men, one broken by guilt, the other by truth. "You were a kid," Kalen said finally, "scared, angry. You didn't plan it. That makes it different." "Does it?" Myron asked quietly. "Because it doesn't feel different." Kalen didn't answer. The silence stretched until the clock ticked past dawn. Then Kalen stood. "Your mother's leaving town," he said. "Maybe you should too. Start over, somewhere the past can't find you." Myron smiled faintly. "The past always finds you. Detective, it just wears a different face." Kalen walked to the door. Yeah, he said, but sometimes it gets tired of chasing. He turned to leave, but Myron's voice stopped him. Kalen, he said, why did you really come back to this case? After all these years, Kalen hesitated. Because your father was my partner, he said quietly, and I needed to know if I failed him. Myron looked at him, eyes wide like he was seeing the man behind the badge for the first time. I'm sorry, he whispered. Kalen gave a small nod. So am I. He stepped out into the morning. The rain had stopped. The sky was still gray, but softer like the world was exhaling after a long night. Kalen lit a cigarette, the smoke curling up into the pale light. He thought about all the ghosts that never stayed buried, the ones that lived in hearts instead of graves. He'd gotten the truth, but like all truths, it came with a cost. As he walked down the empty street, the city slowly waking around him, he couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, some things weren't meant to be solved. Some things were meant to haunt you quietly, endlessly, until the end. The graveyard sat on the edge of town, where the fog rolled in thick and slow like the world itself was trying to bury its mistakes. Kalen stood there, hat pulled low, coat collar turned up against the wind, the headstones stretched out like broken teeth, each one whispering a story that no one wanted to hear, in his hands. He held a folder worn, yellowed, heavy with time, the veil case. 15 years of silence, 15 years of rot. He laid it down on the grave. The name etched into the stone was half faded, but he didn't need to read it. He'd memorized it long ago. Guess we're done. Partner, he murmured. His voice carried no triumph. Just fatigue, the kind that seeps into your bones and never leaves. He stood there a long time, listening to the wind move through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang soft, hollow, and final. Kalen thought about Myron, about Alara, about all the pieces that had fallen into place too late to matter. Justice, he'd learned, wasn't about who was guilty. It was about who was left standing when the truth came out. And in this case, truth had left no one unscathed. Back at his apartment, the air smelled of dust and rain-soaked paper, the same air he'd been breathing since retirement, the same ghosts living in the corners. He walked past the cluttered desk, cigarette burns in the wood, files stacked like tombstones, each one another life he'd picked apart, another memory he wished he could forget. He picked up the empty glass sitting near the window. The last drop of whiskey clung to the bottom like regret. Kalen sighed. Time to clean house. He muttered. He moved slowly, methodically pulling down old case folders, brushing off the dust, sliding them into boxes. The sound of paper scraping against cardboard became a rhythm. Steady. Final. He paused at one photograph, two men in their 30s, arms around each other, smiling like the world hadn't yet turned cruel. Kalen and Adrian Vale, back when friendship still meant something, back before everything went wrong. He slid the photo into the box, closed the lid, and taped it shut. Then he carried the boxes up the narrow stairs to the attic, a space that smelled of mothballs and memory. The single bulb above him flickered as he placed the box in the farthest corner. He stood there for a moment, staring at it, that plain brown box that held 15 years of obsession, 15 years of ghosts. Sleep tight, he whispered, and turned off the light. Later, he drove to the coast. The sun was setting, spilling molten gold over the water. It wasn't the kind of beach you saw in postcards. The sand was dark, littered with driftwood, the waves slow and steady, a heartbeat against the shore. Kalen walked down to the edge, coat flapping in the wind. He lit a cigarette, watched the smoke get carried away. Somewhere behind him, gulls screamed sharp and lonely. He thought about all the people tangled in this case. Seraph, tending her garden again, the only living thing she could still nurture. Alara, leaving town with eyes that had seen too much. Myron, trying to rebuild a life on the ruins of his guilt. They'd all earned a little peace, maybe even redemption, but peace was never his to have. His world existed in the spaces between crimes, in the moments after the gunshot. Before the silence, he pulled the silver lighter from his pocket. A gift from Adrian, back when they both believed in justice. The initials were still scratched into the side K and A. Kalen smiled faintly and flicked it open. The flame danced in the wind, small and stubborn. He watched it for a long while, then snapped it shut. The sun sank below the horizon, and the world turned the color of memory, that soft amber glow before night takes over. He thought of something Myron had said. The past always finds you, it just wears a different face. He took a deep breath, tasting salt and smoke. Maybe, he murmured, but not tonight. He turned back toward the car, the wind catching his coat like the wings of something old and restless. When he reached the door, he looked once more at the horizon, a thin line of gold between sea and sky. It looked like an ending, maybe even a beginning. He got in, started the engine, and drove until the beach disappeared in the rearview mirror. That night, in his apartment, Kalen sat by the window, the radio humming low. Some old jazz tune drifted through the static brass. Piano, the faint brush of drums, the kind of song that makes you miss things you never had. He leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed. The city lights flickered outside like 1,000 restless souls. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the case, or the lies, or the blood on old hands. He was just there breathing, alive, unburdened. Somewhere deep in the night, he whispered to himself, "Case closed," and for once, he almost believed it. Morning light came late to the town. It didn't rise, it crept in, slow and uncertain, like someone testing the weight of forgiveness. Somewhere, whoa, a kettle hissed. Somewhere else. An old clock began another day. The world kept turning indifferent, exhausted, beautiful in its small routines. Kalen watched it all from his window. The streets below were empty except for a milk truck and a woman walking her dog. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried the smell of it, metallic, clean, almost new. He stirred his coffee with the end of a pen and thought, so this is what peace looks like. Uneventful, quiet, almost fragile enough to break if you breathe too loud. Across town, Seraph Vale knelt in her garden. The roses had survived another winter, though barely. Their stems were blackened, their petals tired, but Seraph didn't mind. She had always believed beauty came from endurance. She clipped a dying leaf, hummed an old tune, something her son used to whistle when he thought no one was listening. Her hands trembled when she touched the soil. Age, yes, but also memory, the kind that never really fades. It just grows quieter, like a radio signal lost to static. When she finished watering the plants, she sat back on her heels, looking at the sunlight cutting through the trees for the first time in 15 years. She smiled without guilt. At the same hour, Ilara stood in her living room surrounded by open boxes. She was cleaning out the past, literally. Framed photos, clothes she'd never worn again, letters yellowed by time, each one a small act of surrender. The curtains were open, letting the morning in. The house, once suffocating, suddenly felt breathable. Her hands paused on a picture of her and Adrian, their wedding day. Two strangers caught in a photograph pretending to be happy. She set it down carefully, face down, and whispered, "Goodbye."
For years, her life had been a mausoleum, every room a reminder of guilt and silence. But now, there was a strange clarity in the emptiness. She brewed tea, let the steam fog up the window. Outside, kids ran past on their way to school, laughter echoing like something she thought she'd forgotten. Ilara smiled faintly. The sound didn't hurt anymore. Myron Vale sat at his desk in a sleek glass office overlooking the city. Success had found him, or maybe he'd built it brick by brick, lie by lie. But this morning wasn't about business. On his phone screen, Seraph's name blinked. He hesitated before answering, the same way someone might hesitate before opening a wound that's finally started to heal. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. Her voice came through gentle, thin, like a memory made of silk.
How are you, dear? He looked out over the skyline. The light glinted off the towers, the same way it once glinted off the police tape at the crime scene. I'm getting there, he said, trying to make things right. There was silence, but not the painful kind, the kind that means understanding. I'm proud of you, Seraph whispered. He closed his eyes. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was close enough. Down in the industrial district, Reeson wiped grease from his hands and gestured to the kid standing by the car hood. No, no, you're flooding the carburetor. Kid, listen to it. Feel it. The boy nodded, adjusting the wrench. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. Reeson laughed, a sound rusty from disuse. Yeah, he said, that's it. He didn't talk about the past anymore. Didn't drink much, either. The ghosts had quieted. For now, work had a way of keeping them at bay. As he leaned on the workbench, sunlight hit the dust in the air, a quiet constellation suspended above him. He thought about Kalen, and for a moment, almost said a prayer. Then he shook it off. Men like him didn't pray. They just kept moving. That afternoon, Kalen walked to the pier. The wind carried the tang of salt and diesel. Boats rocked lazily against the dock, their ropes creaking in rhythm with the tide. He found his usual spot, baited the hook, and cast the line. Fishing wasn't about catching anything. It was about silence, the kind that didn't accuse or remind. He leaned back in his chair, the brim of his hat shading his eyes. Somewhere behind him, a couple laughed. Life went on. It always did. He let himself drift, thoughts moving like the ripples on the water. Then his phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. 2 words. Thank you. He didn't need to guess who it was from. Kalen smiled, that quiet, tired smile of a man who's finally stopped running from the past. He set the phone down, reeled in the line, and packed up. The sun was sinking, painting the sky in colors that didn't have names. He stood there for a long time, watching the horizon fade into gold and shadow.
Yeah, he murmured. To no one in particular. You're welcome. The waves rolled in again, soft and endless, the kind of sound that could wash anything clean, if you listened long enough. Narrator's voice, low and slow, over faint jazz. Some stories don't end, they just stop hurting. Maybe that's the best we get, a few quiet mornings, a few clean breaths, and the sense that, somewhere, the ghosts have finally learned to rest. The rain stopped 3 days ago, and for the first time in months, Kalen noticed the silence wasn't empty, it was alive. The garden behind his house had gone wild over the years, ivy crawling up the fence like old scars, weeds strangling the life out of the soil. It was a graveyard of good intentions. He stood there with a shovel in hand, sleeves rolled up, breath misting in the cool afternoon air. A man in his 60s shouldn't be digging in the dirt, not with those joints, not with that back. But Kalen had spent too long digging into ghosts.
Maybe this was his penance. The first thrust of the shovel hit something hard, rock, maybe root. Didn't matter. He kept going. Each slice of metal into earth felt like confession. By noon, the sun had burned through the clouds. Sweat beaded on his temples. The earth was dark and fragrant, alive. Forgiving. He paused, leaning on the shovel. You'd laugh at me. Adrian, he muttered, voice caught somewhere between memory and exhaustion. Detective Gone Gardner. Hell of a twist. A crow landed on the fence, black and unbothered. It watched him with the same look the world gives you when it knows you've lost too much but keeps on trying anyway. Kalen smirked. Don't judge me, featherbrain. He went back to work. That evening, the neighborhood came alive with small sounds, doors closing, a dog barking, the hum of life. Kalen sat on the back steps, a glass of iced tea sweating in his hand, looking out at the mess he'd made. Rows of freshly turned soil. Small packets of seed lying beside him, tomatoes, marigolds, something called Summer Bloom. He'd forgotten why he bought them. Maybe he just liked the names. A ball rolled across the yard, bumping against his boot. Then came a voice, small, breathless. "Mister, sorry, can I get my ball back?" Kalen looked up. A kid stood by the fence, no more than 8, hair tousled, freckles like stars across his nose, the kind of kid who still believed the world was mostly kind. Kalen picked up the ball. It was red, scuffed, and warm from the sun. He tossed it back, underhanded. "You ought to keep a tighter hold on your fastball." The kid grinned. "Thanks," Kalen nodded. "Any time." The boy lingered a second. Curious. "What are you planting?" Kalen looked down at the packets beside him. "Hope. Maybe. Haven't decided if it'll grow." The kid blinked, then shrugged. "My grandma says plants grow better if you talk nice to 'em." Kalen chuckled. "Yeah, maybe I'll try that." The boy waved and ran off, the red ball bouncing beside him for a long time. Kalen sat there, staring at the patch of soil where the boy's voice still hung in the air. Something small shifted inside him, not joy, exactly, but something that could become joy, if he let it. The next morning, the world smelled like wet earth and promise. Kalen brewed his coffee, the good kind, and stepped outside barefoot. The garden glistened, the first green shoots had broken the soil. Tiny, defiant things reaching for light. He knelt beside them, tracing the rim of a leaf with his fingertip. It was fragile, translucent, alive. He exhaled. "Guess you're tougher than me," he said softly. In that moment, the quiet didn't feel like loneliness anymore. It felt like peace. He began to tend the garden, daily watering, pruning, talking to the plants like old friends. The neighbors started waving when they passed. Sometimes. The boy came by with his ball, offering questions about everything from worms to clouds. Kalen answered when he could, lied when he couldn't, smiled when he should have scowled. The rhythm of life, it had found him again. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he stood by the fence, the sky bleeding orange and violet. From the open window inside came the faint sound of jazz, Coltrane, maybe Miles. The notes floated through the air like drifting smoke, haunting and gentle. Kalen leaned against the post, eyes on the horizon. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and soil, a strange mix that somehow fit him perfectly. He thought about the case not with obsession, not anymore, just memory, the people, the lies, the truth that had nearly broken him. It all seemed distant now, as though it had happened to someone else in another lifetime. Maybe it had. The kids' laughter echoed from the street, bright, unfiltered, alive. Kalen smiled. He hadn't done that, really smiled in years. He picked up the watering can, poured it gently over the flowers. The sunlight caught the water in midair, turning it into gold. He whispered, "That's enough digging, old man." The earth soaked it in, the flowers bowed slightly, and the air shimmered with quiet acceptance. Kalen set the can down, stepped back, and looked at the garden, messy, imperfect, stubborn, just like him. Narrator's voice, low, fading into dusk. "You can't bury the past. Not really, but sometimes, if you're lucky, you can plant something new on top of it. And if you're patient enough, if you water it and talk to it and let the light do its work, maybe one day. The ghosts grow quiet. Maybe one day. You do too." The city had changed its skin again. New glass towers rose where the old bones used to stand. Cafes with names that tried too hard. Neon bleeding into puddles after the rain. But the ghosts, they didn't care about skylines or rebranding. They lingered in the cracks, the shadows, the spaces between names. Myron drove through the downtown loop in silence. The hum of the engine was the only steady thing in his life now. He wore a tailored suit, but it didn't fit like it used to. Success has weight, guilt, more so. He parked in front of the Silver Cup Diner, the same one Kalen used to haunt. The smell of bacon and bad coffee hit him like a memory you wish you could forget but can't. Inside, the place was half empty. The same old waitress with tired eyes poured him coffee without asking. She remembered him, or maybe she just remembered the kind of face that keeps coming back to the same ghosts. He stirred the cup, watched the swirl, then he saw her, Ilara, sitting by the window, light cutting across her features like the edge of a knife. She wasn't hiding anymore, no more walls, no more cold armor, just a woman in her 40s who'd run out of reasons to pretend. He walked over slowly. Ilara, she looked up. The eyes that once held entire storms now looked calm, almost distant. Myron, she said, with a small nod. It's been a while. He sat across from her. The silence between them was alive, the kind that carries 1,000 unsent letters. How've you been? He asked. I'm trying, she said. The house is quieter now. I gave away most of his things. The rest, I burned. He nodded, unsure if that was healing or punishment. And your mother? Ilara's gaze drifted out the window. Seraph's living with my sister up north. She started painting again. Says the colors help her sleep. Myron smiled faintly. That's good. She always had a good eye. She did. Ilara paused. She still talks about you, you know. Said you reminded her of Adrian. Before the darkness. He didn't know what to do with that. He took a sip of his coffee instead, bitter. Grounding. Outside. A bus hissed to a stop. A couple laughed too loud, too young to care who heard. Life moved on. As it always does. Ilara leaned forward, voice lower now. Do you ever think it's over? Myron, all of it. The pain, the questions, the guilt. He thought about Kalen, the old man with tired eyes who still believed in light, about the garden, the sound of soil turning under his hands. No, Myron said softly, but I think maybe we just learn to live with the quiet parts, the ones that don't hurt so much. Ilara's lips curved into something almost like a smile. The quiet parts. She repeated, I could live with that. They sat there for a while, watching the sunlight crawl across the table. It felt fragile, but it was real. Later that evening, Myron drove to the old pier, the one where everything had started. The waves crashed against the pylons, the same rhythm, the same salt. He stood at the edge, hands in pockets, wind in his hair. In the distance, a figure walked along the boardwalk, slow, deliberate, a woman in a long coat. Seraph. She saw him and stopped. A long moment passed. Then she smiled, small, trembling, but real. You look better. Myron, he exhaled, trying to, at least. They stood there in silence, the sea between them and the past. I've been painting, Seraph said quietly. The same face keeps showing up in every canvas, not Adrian's, yours. Maybe that means something. Myron swallowed. Maybe it means we both survived. Seraph nodded. Maybe. A gull cried overhead, sharp and fleeting. They watched the horizon fade into gold. Night found them in their separate places, Seraph by the shore, Ilara under the quiet hum of her lamp, Myron driving through empty streets that no longer frightened him. The city breathed again, slower this time, wounds turning to scars, scars learning to fade. Somewhere, in a small house by the water, Kalen sat by his window, a radio playing low, jazz, again. He didn't know why he'd turned it on, maybe out of habit, maybe hope.
The announcer's voice drifted through the static. Good evening. Night travelers, wherever you are, whoever you've lost, remember, morning always finds a way back. Kalen smiled, not the smile of a man who's forgotten, but one who's forgiven. He reached for his notebook, the same one from the old case. Inside, beneath pages of scribbled clues and cigarette burns, a single line in fresh ink. Some ghosts don't leave to haunt you. They stay to remind you what's worth saving. He closed the book. Outside, dawn began to stir, pale, gentle, unstoppable narrator's voice, calm, reflective. In the end, every city is a graveyard, but if you listen close, beneath the noise and the neon, you can hear something else, the hum of new beginnings. It's not loud, it never is, but it's there, waiting.
The wind came in early that night, a cold, restless thing that carried the smell of rain and something older, something that tasted like memory. Kalen stood on his porch, mug of chamomile cooling in his hands. The garden laid out before him like a half-finished confession. The flowers trembled in the gusts, whispering their little secrets to the dark. He listened, not to the wind, but to the silence underneath it, the one that had become too familiar, too easy. That's when he felt it, a shift, a disturbance. Not loud, just wrong. He stepped off the porch, eyes narrowing. The gate at the edge of his yard creaked slow, deliberate, the sound of an unwelcome visitor. Kalen tightened his grip on the mug. Who's there? No answer, just the wind, brushing through the ivy like a thief with cold fingers. He walked forward, each step cautious, each breath quieter than the last. The night pressed close around him, thick, velvet, listening. At the gate hung an envelope, cream-colored, heavy, the kind used for wedding invitations or last rites. No stamp, no address, just his name, written in a hand he recognized instantly, a hand he hadn't seen in years. Kalen's breath caught in his throat. The mug slipped from his grasp, shattering against the stones. He opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside, a single sheet of paper, one sentence, 7 words. You stopped digging. I didn't. No signature. Didn't need one. The handwriting was enough. Resand, the mentor who'd vanished, the ghost who'd walked out before the dust had settled, the man who'd taught Kalen how to see through lies and how to hide them. Kalen closed his eyes. The night pulsed around him. The wind colder now, sharper, as if it had been waiting for this moment to sink its teeth in. He folded the note with deliberate care, slid it into his jacket pocket, and walked back to the house. The boards creaked beneath him, old wood complaining about old demons. Inside, he locked the door, though he knew it wouldn't matter. Locks stopped the living, not the lost. He sat at his kitchen table, lamp casting long shadows across the room. The notebook lay beside him, open to the last line he'd written days earlier. Some ghosts don't leave to haunt you. They stay to remind you what's worth saving. He stared at the words, then at the envelope, then back at the words. A bitter smile tugged at his lips. Maybe I wrote that too soon, he muttered. Across the city, in a high-rise office overlooking the river, Myron was finishing the last of his paperwork when his phone buzzed. A message, unknown number. He frowned and opened it. A photo appeared, grainy, night shot. His mother's old house, Alara standing in the doorway, unaware, vulnerable, a figure in the street, tall, lean, watching her. Then another text followed. Are you awake? Myron. He felt the blood drain from his face. His heart hammered against his ribs. He called Kalen. Once, twice. On the third ring, the old man answered. Kalen. My mother's house, Myron said, voice shaking. Someone's there. Someone's watching her. Kalen's chair scraped against the floor. Describe the picture. Myron did, quietly, carefully, fear in every syllable. A long silence followed, then Kalen's voice low, steady, dangerous. Pack a bag. Come to my place. Now. My mother. She'll be fine for the moment. The person who sent that message didn't send it to her. Hecker. They sent it to you. They're trying to draw you out. Myron exhaled hard. Kalen. Who the hell is this? Kalen looked at the envelope on the table, at the handwriting, at the single sentence that felt like a knife drawn across old scars. Someone, he said slowly, who believes the story isn't over. Meanwhile, across the river, under the dim hum of a broken streetlight, Alara stood at her window, staring out into the dark. She'd felt eyes on her all evening, the prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the one she thought she'd left behind. She closed the curtains, turned off the lights, but the unease lingered. She clutched her phone, thumb hovering over Kalen's contact. She didn't press it. Not yet. The wind rattled the window, a single sharp tap like a knuckle brushing glass. Alara froze, Her pulse quickened. She wasn't alone. She knew that now. She'd always known it. Deep down that the past wasn't done with her, not by a long shot. Back at Kaylin's house, the old detective stood at the window, watching the road, waiting for Myron's headlights to appear. The wind carried the smell of rain and something else, something metallic, ominous, unavoidable. Kaylin whispered to himself, voice barely a breath. You didn't stop digging, Reese, and so what the hell did you find? The city was holding its breath. Kaylin felt it the moment he stepped outside, the way the streets sounded thinner, the way the night air pressed in tighter, as if the darkness itself was waiting for someone to make the first wrong move. He locked the door behind him, slipped the envelope deeper into his coat pocket, and scanned the empty road. The street lamps were halos of pale gold choked by mist, flickering like they couldn't decide if they wanted to stay alive. Across the way, Myron's car finally appeared, engine humming low, headlights slicing through the fog like twin scalpels. The kid pulled up, exhaled hard, and stepped out. His tie was crooked, his shirt half untucked, a man who'd run out of confidence halfway through the evening. Kaylin stepped forward. You drove fast. I was scared. Good, Kaylin said. Fear keeps you honest. Myron huffed out a humorless laugh. Yeah. Well, right now I'd settle for some damn clarity. He motioned to his phone. Whoever sent that photo, do you think they're the same person who left? Whatever you got tonight. Kaylin didn't answer immediately. He took his time, watching the street, listening to the air. The wind whistled along the gutters like it was dragging chains. Finally, he spoke. I think someone wants you and me back in the game. And they're not subtle about it. Myron swallowed hard. Why now? Kaylin opened his mouth, then stopped. Because the truth wasn't an answer. It was a blade. Inside. Kaylin said simply, we talk inside. The house felt smaller with Myron in it, like the walls were leaning closer to overhear them. Kaylin slid the envelope across the table. Read it. Myron unfolded it. 7 words, his eyes widened. Breath hitching, Rysand. The Rysand. The only one who matters, Kaylin replied. I thought he vanished. He did. Then this means he didn't vanish far enough. A tense silence settled between them, the kind that carried weight, history, and the stench of everything unresolved. Myron slumped into the chair. Kaylin. What kind of man was he, really? Kaylin leaned back, staring past Myron, into years that still hurt to look at. Ryson was the kind of man who could walk into a room and know every secret in it before the door closed behind him. He saw things the rest of us weren't brave enough to admit existed. He trained us to find truth like it was a religion, and he expected us to pay for it like it was a sin. Myron listened, jaw tight. So why would he contact you now? Kaylin's eyes drifted to the window. The night beyond was still, too still, like a hunter holding stillness in the palm of its hand. Because someone woke up a ghost, Kaylin murmured. And Reeson wants to know who. Across the river. Alara sat on the edge of her bed, phone in her hand, head bowed. The house creaked around her, familiar sounds that suddenly felt foreign. She flinched at each one, her breath catching every time the wind tapped against the siding. She finally dialed Kaylin's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. She hung up. Fear had always been her captor, but tonight, guilt was the one tightening the shackles. She swallowed, pressing a trembling hand to her forehead. We shouldn't have done that, she whispered to no one, to the dark, to the past. We should have let it stay buried. Another sound outside, a soft exhale, almost human. Alara froze. The curtains trembled. Something or someone was out there, watching, measuring her fear. She backed away from the window, breath shaking. The past is coming, she whispered, And it remembers us. Back at Kalen's. Myron paced the living room like a caged animal. What do we do? Wait for him to make another move. Kalen was still, calm in a way that made the room feel colder. We don't wait, he said. Waiting is how people get buried. Myron stopped pacing. So we go after him. Kalen turned toward the window. Far in the distance, lightning flickered behind the clouds, silent. Soft, like someone lighting a match behind a curtain. We find out where Reeson has been hiding, Kalen said, and more importantly, what woke him up. Myron nodded, but fear lingered behind his eyes. Kalen, if Reeson's back. Is this good or bad? Kalen stepped past him, reached for his coat. It's never good when a ghost remembers your name. He placed a hand on Myron's shoulder, steady, grounding, preparing him for the storm creeping toward them. Get ready, Kalen said quietly. Tonight was the warning. Tomorrow, the past starts hunting back. Outside, the wind rose again, sharper now, urgent, pushing the story forward like unseen hands. The morning had the kind of silence that only follows a long night, soft, almost sacred. Dawn slipped through the cracked blinds of a roadside diner, turning chrome and coffee into liquid gold. The air smelled of bacon, cigarette smoke, and something like forgiveness. Kalen sat in his usual corner booth, back to the wall, eyes half lost in the steam rising from his cup. The years had finally caught up to him, but not as an enemy, more like an old companion who'd stopped chasing. Across from him, Myron settled into the seat with a grunt. The detective had traded his trench coat for a flannel shirt, though the weight in his eyes hadn't gone anywhere. Never thought I'd see you at sunrise, Myron said, stirring his coffee. Kalen smirked. I ran out of ghosts to chase at night. The waitress passed by, poured more coffee, smiled the way small-town angels do, no questions, no judgment. Outside, the highway hummed with trucks heading nowhere in particular. For a moment, neither man spoke. They didn't need to. Some silences are earned. Myron finally broke it, voice soft. You think it's really over? Kalen looked out the window. The fog was lifting off the fields, slow and patient, revealing the shape of the world again. Over. He let out a breath. Maybe. But peace, that's never permanent. It just stops by for breakfast sometimes. Myron chuckled, a sound that felt like it hadn't been used in years. You always were the poet. Yeah, Kalen muttered. Didn't do me much good in this business. They clinked their mugs together in a quiet toast, not to victory, not even to survival, but to endurance, the kind that doesn't make headlines, but still counts. Ilara's house was filled with morning light and the smell of lemon polish. She moved through the rooms with quiet purpose, boxing up the relics of a life that had already moved on. A photograph of her and Kalen lay on the counter, younger faces, brighter eyes. She traced a finger over his image, smiled faintly, and slipped it into a drawer. Some memories weren't meant for display, just for keeping safe. Her phone buzzed. Seraph's name lit up the screen. Hey, she said, tucking the phone between her shoulder and ear. Morning. Seraph's voice came calm, composed, like always. In the background, the faint sound of traffic in the city, heard from Kalen. Ilara shook her head, even though Seraph couldn't see it. Not since last week. But that's good, right? Means he's breathing. Seraph smiled on the other end. For him, that's progress. There was a pause, filled with all the things they didn't have to say, the cases, the losses, the things that never made it into reports.
You ever think we'll stop looking over our shoulders? Ilara asked quietly. Seraph hesitated.
No, but maybe we'll learn to walk forward anyway. When the call ended, Ilara stood at the window, sunlight spilling across her face. Outside, the world looked clean again. Maybe that was enough for now. At the old workshop, Reeson leaned over a cluttered table, a cigarette dangling from his lips. teaching a kid how to adjust a timing chain. The boy couldn't have been more than 19, wide-eyed, grease-stained, trying to keep up. Patience, Rhysand said, tapping ash into a coffee can. You don't fight the machine. You listen to it. It tells you what it needs. The kid nodded, fumbling with a wrench. Rhysand watched him work, and for a fleeting moment, he saw himself decades ago reckless, angry, desperate to prove something. He exhaled smoke and smiled. Maybe the kid would have a better shot. The workshop radio played an old blues tune gravelly, worn, and perfect. It filled the air with ghosts that didn't hurt anymore. And out by the lake, miles from the noise and memory, Kaelin sat in a small wooden boat. The morning mist drifted across the water, slow as thought. The rod was still, the line trailing in the current. He wasn't really fishing, not for anything that swam. Anyway, he wore a simple jacket, sleeves rolled up, the wind brushing his face. The world was quiet here, no sirens, no footsteps behind him, no past trying to claw its way back, just the rhythmic slap of water against wood, the whisper of distant birds. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a worn photo, the same one that had once haunted him. Jonah, Myron, Seraph, all of them, frozen in a time when things made sense. Kaelin studied it, then folded it carefully and placed it back. The sun was rising now, gold spilling over the lake like a confession. For a brief, impossible moment, he felt weightless, as if he'd finally drifted clear of everything. He smiled. Not the hard smile of a man hiding pain. A small, honest one, the kind you give to the morning when you've made peace with the night. He cast the line again, watched the ripples spread, and thought maybe this is what peace looks like, fragile, fleeting, but real. Then, in the distance, a low rumble thunder, maybe, or something else. The breeze shifted. A chill crept back across the water. Kaelin glanced up, eyes narrowing just slightly. The calm held, but only just, because in this world, dawn is never more than a promise, and promises have a way of breaking. He reeled in the line slowly, exhaled a long breath, and whispered under his breath, "Guess peace never lasts." The wind answered with a soft sigh through the reeds, as the lake shimmered under the first full light of day, beautiful, deceptive, alive, and somewhere out there, the past smiled back. Night had a way of settling inside Kaelin's bones, especially on evenings like this when the house felt too quiet, and the silence pressed up against his chest like a question he didn't want to answer. The old floorboards creaked as he crossed the room, the lamp throwing a weak amber glow across the cluttered desk. Files lay scattered like broken promises, open pages whispering things he'd ignored for far too long. He rubbed both hands over his face, trying to summon the version of himself who once knew exactly where every piece belonged. But that man was gone, or at least buried deep beneath fatigue, regret, and years spent pretending he'd moved on. Kaelin dropped into the chair and forced himself to look at the photographs again. Cold case number 17, 15 years dead. But the wound's still raw. He should have left it alone. He knew that. But ghosts don't whisper to the living unless they have unfinished business. And tonight, one of them was screaming. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the autopsy image, a bruise on the victim's wrist, small, circular, oddly shaped. He'd looked at this photo dozens of times, maybe hundreds, but something new clicked loose in his memory with a slow, terrifying clarity. A ring, not just any ring, her ring, Alara's, gold band, wide, a single inset stone with a beveled edge sharp enough to cut skin if you held onto someone too hard. Kaelin felt the air leave his lungs. The bruise wasn't random. It was a mark from a struggle with someone wearing that ring. "Alara," he whispered. Her name lingered in the room like perfume from a life he didn't want to revisit. He stood abruptly, the chair groaning behind him as though protesting the truth. He grabbed his coat, hesitated for half a heartbeat, then reached for his keys. If the truth was knocking, he needed to open the damn door. Seraph's house sat at the end of a narrow street, its porch light flickering like an old heartbeat. She answered the knock, slower than usual, her eyes sunken but sharp like someone who'd stared into darkness long enough to recognize all its shapes. Kaylin. Her voice cracked. "What time is it late?" he said. "I need to ask you something." She studied him, then stepped aside. The house smelled like herbal tea and old grief. He sat across from her at the kitchen table. "It's about the night your son died." The way her face tightened told him everything she'd been waiting for this moment, dreading it. "What? What do you want to know?" "Did Alara come here that night?" Seraph's lips trembled, her hands clasped together, knuckles white. She didn't look at him when she answered. "Yes." Kaylin shut his eyes, the confirmation hitting harder than he expected. She was crying. Seraph continued, kept saying she'd done something terrible, something she couldn't take back. "Did she say what number?" Seraph whispered. "Just that she loved him." And she was scared, terrified. Kaylin stood slowly. The room suddenly felt too small, the walls pushing inward. "Thank you," he murmured. Seraph's voice stopped him at the door. "Kaylin, don't hate her. Whatever happened, she was hurting too." He didn't answer. He couldn't. He chose the old bridge as the meeting place, the one overlooking the dying river, where the sunset cast everything in bruised purples and tired gold, a place where endings felt natural. Ilara arrived wrapped in a long coat, her posture tight but composed. "You said it was urgent," she said. "It is." He stepped closer, the cold wind slicing between them. "Ilara, I know." Her eyes widened, then softened, not with surprise, but with resignation. "How long?" "Long enough." She exhaled shakily and leaned on the railing, looking at the water below as if it could swallow her confession. "I didn't mean to kill him," she said quietly. "I swear to you." "Kaylin, I only meant to protect myself."
Her voice cracked, her hands trembling. He grabbed me, hard, the same way he always did when he was angry. I pushed him. He slipped, hit his head on the corner of the table. It all happened so fast. Kaylin stared at her, the pieces falling into place with a painful inevitability, and the bruises on his wrist. "From you trying to pull free." She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was done being afraid," she whispered, "but I didn't mean for him to die." Kaylin felt no anger, just a heavy, dull ache. "So you hid it." I panicked. Her breath came out jagged. "Zayden helped. Myron, he didn't know. I swear he didn't know." A pair of headlights appeared behind them, growing brighter. Alara closed her eyes. "You told him, didn't you?" "No," Kaylin said softly. "He figured it out on his own." Police doors slammed. Boots hit pavement. Alara didn't run. She didn't beg. She lifted her hands, the same hands that once shook on Seraph's porch, and let the officers cuff her. Myron stood beside Kaylin, eyes shining with hurt and relief and everything in between. "She was my mother," he whispered. "She still is," Kaylin replied. "But sometimes loving someone means facing what they've done." They watched the cruiser pull away, red and blue lights reflecting off the river like fractured memories. The truth didn't bring closure, didn't bring peace, didn't fix the broken pieces of any of them. But it settled, like dust after a long storm. And sometimes that was the closest thing to justice the world ever offered. Night had settled across the town like a thick coat of dust, not loud, not violent, just heavy, the kind of heaviness you feel in your chest before a storm breaks, when nature itself is bracing for impact. Kaylin sat alone in his office again, the soft hum of the radiator the only company he had left.
The arrest of Alara should have brought him closure, or at the very least a steady breath.
But as he stared at the case file spread out before him, a familiar itch started crawling up the back of his spine. Something didn't fit. Something never fit. The truth had a shape it always did. This one felt misshapen, like a puzzle forced together with the wrong pieces. He pulled the photos closer the living room. The body, the stain of blood spreading like a black flower on the hardwood floor. And then the bruise, the one on the wrist, the one that led him to Alara. But there was another mark too, one he'd overlooked until now. A scrape along the victim's forearm, slight, shallow, but angled in a way that suggested metal. Grease, the faint shadow of machinery. Kalen leaned back, the realization hitting slow and cold. Rysand, he muttered. The man had always lived around machines' engines, metal scraps, leftover parts from jobs he did for cash. A bruise like that could be an accident. Or it could be something much darker. And Rysand's testimony all those years ago, it had been too clean, too rehearsed, too convenient. Kalen flipped through the old transcripts. Rysand's words stared back at him. I saw Zayden leaving the house. Looked angry. Didn't think much of it, but Zayden didn't smoke. And the cigarette butt found outside the house that night, the one Kalen had dismissed, was a brand Rysand used to buy by the carton. Kalen exhaled slowly. He didn't want this truth. He'd thought the last revelation was enough pain for all of them, but the past wasn't done carving into the present. He grabbed his coat and headed out. There was one more door he needed to knock on. Rysand's workshop sat behind an old auto yard, the building swallowed by shadows. The overhead lights flickered inside, buzzing the way dying lights do when they're too stubborn to quit. Kalen pushed the door open.
The smell of oil, metal, and stale sweat washed over him. Rysand looked up from a workbench, eyes narrowing. Well, look who crawled out of his retirement cave. Thought you'd be celebrating your big break in the case. Kalen walked slowly around the cluttered room. No celebration, he said. Not yet. Rysand shrugged. Didn't peg you as the sentimental type. Kalen stopped at a shelf, fingers brushing across tools arranged with suspicious precision. Tell me something, he said. You still smoke the same brand? Rysand froze for half a second. Not long, but long enough. Quit years ago. Bad habit. Funny, Kalen murmured, because one of those old butts showed up at the crime scene from 15 years back, the same brand you always had in your pocket. Rysand's jaw tightened. You're reaching, maybe, Kalen said.
But then I started thinking, why would a mechanic claim he saw a businessman like Zayden outside the house? Wrong hair, wrong build, wrong everything unless you needed to point the finger at someone else. Rysand's eyes darkened. What the hell are you accusing me of? Kalen stepped closer. You tell me. For a moment, the workshop held its breath. Only the soft drip of oil from a pipe overhead dared make a sound. And then Rysand sighed a tired, defeated sound. You just don't stop, do you? It's the job, Kalen replied. Rysand sat on a stool, shoulders sagging. I didn't mean to kill him, he said quietly. I swear, I went there to talk, to settle things. Your friend, he ruined my life. Kalen burned my reputation to save his own. I just wanted him to know what that felt like. Kalen's voice was low, and the fight Rysand dragged a hand over his face. He yelled. I yelled. He grabbed me. I pushed. He fell. A bitter laugh escaped him.
Guess that's how most men die, a push at the wrong angle. Kalen stared at him, face unreadable.
You let Alara carry the weight. Rysand swallowed hard. She wasn't supposed to be there. She walked in after it happened, saw the blood, panicked, thought she caused it during their earlier argument. Zayden helped her cover up, and I let it happen. Cowardice, fear, the worst kind of guilt, the quiet kind that eats you from the inside. You ruined her life. Kalen said, I ruined my own first. Rysand met his gaze. Call the cops. You know you want to. Kalen did. He made the call. No hesitation. When the officers arrived and led Rysand out, Kalen watched him disappear into the flashing lights. Another ghost claimed by the night. Later, he sat in his car, hands on the wheel, eyes unfocused. The truth didn't set anyone free. Not Rysand, not Alara, not Myron, not even himself. But the truth was the truth, a weight he'd promised long ago to carry, no matter the cost. He started the engine, drove into the dark, and for the first time in years, the night felt quiet. Morning didn't come gently. It crept in like an apology weak, pale, uncertain if it was welcome. The sun pushed through the blinds in Kalen's apartment, cutting thin stripes of gold across the cluttered desk where he'd tossed the last fragments of the case. Rysand's confession still echoed in his mind, a dull throb he couldn't rub out no matter how many times he replayed it. But this wasn't the kind of pain that demanded answers. This was the kind that demanded acceptance. Kalen shut the case file and slipped it into a cardboard box, the same box that had followed him through every apartment, every job, every sleepless year. He taped it shut. This time the sound of the tape stretching and sticking felt final, like closing the last page of a story no one wanted to hear but everyone needed to know. He grabbed his coat and stepped outside. The air was cool, clean, a rare gift. Seraph's house. Seraph answered the door as if she'd been standing behind it for hours, waiting for a knock she knew was coming. The years had softened her, but grief had etched itself into the corners of her eyes, a permanent shadow. "Kalen," she said, voice thin, "did you find what you were looking for?" He nodded, her hands trembled. "I need you to tell me, all of it." And he did. He told her about the bruise, the lies, Rysand's guilt, Elara's suffering, Myron's silence. He gave her the truth stripped of comfort, stripped of excuses. Only the truth, the thing she'd been owed for 15 years. Seraph didn't cry. Not at first.
She just closed her eyes and breathed, like someone bracing against a wave that had been building on the horizon for half her life. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. "Thank you, Kalen. It hurts, but it's better than not knowing." He nodded once. There was nothing else to say. When he left, Seraph was sitting quietly by the window, the morning light softening her face. She looked smaller, but strangely, less burdened, like the truth had carved away one kind of pain to make room for another she could finally carry. The prison Alara's release paperwork was already in motion. The truth had cleared her name, but time had left its mark. Kalen watched from a distance as she stepped outside the courthouse surrounded by lawyers and reporters. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't look angry. She looked like someone who had survived fire and come out the other side with nothing but ashes in her hands. No husband, no home, no past she wanted to revisit.
Before she disappeared into a waiting car, her eyes drifted across the street and landed on Kalen for a moment. They held each other's gaze, no gratitude, no resentment, just recognition, two survivors acknowledging the weight of truth neither of them had asked for. She nodded. He nodded back. Then she was gone. Myron. They met at the pier, the same spot where Kalen used to clear his head after long nights buried in paperwork. Myron looked older than his age, but something in his posture had shifted. Lighter, or maybe just resigned. "My mom's free," he said quietly. "Yes, she didn't kill him." "No." And Rysand. Kalen's voice was steady. He confessed. Myron looked out at the water. The waves were small, breaking softly against the wooden posts. "It's strange. I thought knowing the truth would fix something. It never fixes anything." Kalen replied. "It just stops the bleeding." Myron let out a slow breath. "I want to start over. Really start over."
No lies, no running. That's a good place to begin. They stood side by side, watching the tide shift. For a moment, the world was quiet. Then Myron rested a hand on Kalen's shoulder, a gesture halfway between respect and gratitude. "Thank you," he said. Kalen didn't answer. He didn't need to. Zayden and recent justice had sharp edges. It cut clean when it could, but more often it sliced unevenly, leaving jagged wounds behind.
Zayden sat in a jail cell somewhere across the state, stripped of his suits, stripped of his empire, stripped of the arrogance that used to cling to him like expensive cologne. Ryson was in a different facility, staring at walls that wouldn't let him forget the moment everything spiraled. Two men whose lies had built a cage around everyone else. Two men now living in cages of their own. Sometimes the world balanced itself in strange ways. Kalen's road. He packed lightly a few clothes, a battered coffee mug, an old fishing rod he hadn't used since he was 40. The detective's coat he always kept by the door stayed behind, hanging like a ghost of a man who no longer existed. He got into his car and drove along the coast. The ocean stretched beside him, vast and indifferent, the perfect witness for a man trying to leave the past without pretending it never happened. He stopped at a small roadside diner, ordered coffee, watched strangers laugh about nothing important, people living without the weight of dead friends or buried confessions, and for the first time in years. Kalen didn't feel out of place among them. Later, at a motel with salt-worn paint and flickering lights, he watched the evening news mention a missing person case developing downtown. He reached for the remote, paused, then turned off the TV. "That's not my world anymore," he whispered. And for once, he believed it.
A year is both everything and nothing. It can rebuild a life, or quietly hollow it out from the inside. For Kalen, it had done a little of both. The motel he'd stayed in that first night had long since faded into the rearview mirror of his wandering. He didn't settle anywhere, didn't plant roots. He drifted along highways and small towns the way smoke drifts through an alley directionless. But not lost, not anymore. He rented a room above a small hardware store in a coastal town that barely made it onto the map. A place where the ocean sounded like an old, tired animal breathing in and out, where no one knew his name, where people said hello in passing without expecting anything more. And for the first time in a long time, Kalen felt unburdened, not healed. The world doesn't give healing so easily, but quieter on the inside. He took odd jobs helping patch roofs, fixing fences, clearing boats tangled in nets, work that required hands instead of memories. Heavy work. Clean work, at night. He walked the pier and let the tide erase the echoes of everything he'd once carried. But ghosts don't die. They don't vanish. They wait. Ilara. The newspapers said she moved to another state, changed her name, started volunteering at a shelter for women running from the same kind of darkness she had lived through. Kalen imagined her stepping out into the cold morning air, feeling the weight of freedom on her shoulders, a freedom sharpened by grief, but freedom still. One headline called her the woman who survived 2 prisons, one built of walls, one built of fear. Kalen folded the paper and never read about her again. Some stories weren't meant to be revisited. Myron. The business Myron inherited after the storm of revelations did not collapse, as many expected. Instead, he rebuilt it quietly, without flair, without the old ruthlessness that used to seep from his father's shadow. He opened scholarships, started a foundation in his mother's name, funded counseling programs for kids who grew up watching violence they couldn't escape. He wrote Kalen once. A simple letter, no embellishment. "I'm trying to make sure what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else. I hope you're somewhere you can breathe." Kalen didn't reply, not because he didn't care, but because the letter didn't ask for an answer. It simply existed, a bridge that didn't need crossing. Seraph, old grief ages in strange ways. Some people grow smaller under its weight, others grow sharper. Seraph became the latter. She began speaking at community meetings, talking about accountability, about truth, about how silence can kill long before violence arrives. She wasn't a crusader, she didn't have that kind of fire, but she was steady. The kind of steady the world listens to when it needs someone who's lived through hell and still stands upright. Kalen visited her once, quietly, without announcing himself. He stood across the street at sunset,
watching her sit on the porch with a cup of tea, the same old wind chimes swaying near her window. She looked older, yes, but lighter, like a woman who'd laid her ghosts down on a table and finally stopped negotiating with them. Kalen didn't approach. His presence would have reopened wounds better left closed. He simply watched her for a moment, then walked away. Rissend and Zayden. One was sentenced after a full confession. The other, after years of rot, finally surfaced. Both ended up where truth should have placed them from the beginning. But prison bars don't erase the past, they just hold it in place. Kalen read the report on Rissand's parole hearing being denied. The man had gained weight, lost hair, and started working in the prison's metal shop, poetic in the cruel way life tends to be. Zayden was in medical care, heart failing, reputation dead long before his body caught up. The world barely remembered the businessman he used to be, and the ones who didn't speak his name with anything resembling respect. It wasn't justice. Exactly, but it was balance, or the closest thing to balance this world ever offers. Kalen's present. On the anniversary of the case's final day, Kalen woke before dawn. The world was still the kind of stillness that belongs only to empty docks and slow-rising tides. He grabbed his fishing rod, walked to the pier, and let the cold wooden boards creak under his boots. The sky was just beginning its bleed from black to blue, a quiet transition, a gentle one. He cast his line into the water, didn't care if anything bit. Some actions aren't about result, they're about the rhythm, the ritual, the reminder that life doesn't always need a purpose to be worth living. A gull cried overhead, the waves rolled beneath him, steady and patient. For once, the sound didn't carry ghosts, it carried peace, or something close to it. A fisherman nearby nodded to him. "Morning," the man said. Kalen returned the nod. Morning. Simple. Human. Enough. He didn't think about the past. Didn't think about the case. Didn't think about the weight he once carried so fiercely he thought it would crush him. The line tugged slightly, just enough to break the stillness. Kalen smiled. Not a dramatic smile, not a triumphant smile.
Just a small, quiet one, the kind that comes when a man realizes the world has stopped demanding blood from him. He reeled in the line, the sun rose. And Kalen let the day begin without fear. Life is a quiet journey we all have to walk, sometimes alone, sometimes carrying wounds no one else can see. But through this story, one truth rises above everything else. The truth doesn't always set you free, but it helps you move forward, lighter and more honest with yourself. Kalen, Elara, Myron, Seraph, each of them lived under their own shadow, and no matter how long or how dark that shadow stretched, they had to walk out of it themselves, step by step. Captain 1. You never really know what someone is fighting inside, so be kind, even when no one is watching. Lesson 2. We can't rewrite the past, but we can choose how to live after the truth finally comes to light.
Lesson 3. Pain doesn't disappear overnight, but time teaches us how to live with it without collapsing. Life never promises a perfect ending, but it always gives us a chance to begin again in a small smile, a soft sunrise, or a quiet breath taken between storms. And if you're listening to this right now, maybe you, too, are on your way back to yourself. Remember, you're not lost. You're just walking through a darker stretch of road before the light returns. If this story meant something to you, please hit like to support the channel, share to spread the message. Subscribe for more noir stories and deep, emotional journeys. Every interaction from you is fuel that helps me keep writing stories like this. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If you'd like an epilogue, a spin-off, or want this turned into a long-running series, just say, continue.